Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Taddo, and I'm the Executive Director of the Rainbow Resource Center. And Patrick and I support each other in the crazy jobs that we have. Enjoyed having lunch together, and I always tease him that he's the one person who might have a crazier job than
He's got us.
So welcome everyone to the presentation of Patrick's graduate research project, What's Love Got to Do with It? The project is a required course for the Masters of Divinity program at the Atlantic School of Theology in Halifax. The students in this course have all been working since the summer to formulate, conduct, and present these projects, and Patrick's presentation is the final one of 4 in this class. Patrick has been very involved in the United Church, but also in the LGBT2SQ community through his work with Rainbow Ministry. We've been happy to partner with Rainbow Ministry throughout the years, and look forward to continuing to partner with Patrick in his new role in the church. This particular project fits perfectly with Patrick's interests in exploring the intersection of Christian faith, sexuality, sexual orientation, and gender identity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, and good evening. Thank you all for coming to join me. And I would like to welcome those who are joining via live stream. We have 6 or 7 people online, stretching all the way from down east to the Carolinas to Western Manitoba. So I'd like to thank you all for being a part of this presentation. There are those people who have asked me why I decided to engage in this research, and in particular, this question on which I'm about to present. In answering this, I realized that this research has evolved out of my own understandings and experiences in the last number of years. See, for many years, churches in North America, Christian churches, have been working towards inclusion with the LGBTQ community. Now, throughout this presentation, I will be using LGBTQ to represent the entire community, still understanding the importance and unique identity of each separate part of that community. So the United Church has its affirming process, a process of education that leads congregations to affirm that they are welcoming and open to LGBTQ persons. And this came out of a specific context in that church. The Anglican Church in Canada, the Lutheran Church, even some Baptist and Mennonite churches have begun to work at reconciliation with the LGBTQ community. But I've also recognized through my work within this particular community that there is still a perception that many churches are places of judgment, hypocrisy, and pain. And so although many churches have done a lot of work around being open and accepting, there are still many perceptions, and these perceptions affect the relationship that these churches have with the LGBTQ community. I've also experienced in my own life a number of different places where there has been an overt criticism of polyamorous relationships, likening them to a consumer lifestyle of taking only what one wants from each individual and leaving the rest. Now, for the sake and in the scope of this study, I'm going to use non-monogamy to indicate both non-monogamous relationships as well as polyamorous relationships. The definition that I used for polyamory comes from the Polyamory Society website and is defined as such. Polyamory is the non-possessive, honest, responsible, and ethical philosophy and practice of loving multiple people simultaneously. Polyamory emphasizes consciously choosing how many partners one wishes to be involved with, rather than accepting social norms which dictate loving only one person at a time. Then, this past July, while I was in Halifax, I heard that there was going to be a workshop titled 10 Rules for Healthy Non-Monogamy. Because this was right in line with what I wanted to research, I thought that I would register and see what this was all about. When I arrived, I was greeted with a diverse group of people. Some self-declared as being in same-gender relationships and others not. Some were married and some were not. Some were just exploring the idea of non-monogamy, while others had been practicing from anywhere from a couple of months to many years. There was a great deal of difference in age range in those attending this workshop. And I also found out that there was a great number of individuals who had wanted to register for the workshop, but were unable to because of the cap on the number of participants. And so what I realized was that this idea of non-monogamy as a form of sexual expression is widespread and cuts across many demographics. And this led me to think not about the perception that the church has around non-monogamy, but rather the perceptions that those who practiced non-monogamy had of how they perceived the church and Christianity itself. And so because of all of this, I decided that I wanted to expand my understanding of non-monogamy and how it intersected with the Christian faith. And so therefore, my research question for this project is how a non-monogamous individual's sexual expression impacts their experiences of and or perceptions of the Christian faith and Christian faith communities in a North American context. What I mean by this is how do individuals who practice non-monogamy see that the church sees them? And how do they themselves, as non-monogamous individuals, see the church? What I hope to accomplish in this study was to come up with any perceptions that non-monogamous individuals had of Christianity and Christian faith communities, because I believe that these perceptions can be instrumental in any connection that these individuals might or might not make with Christian faith communities and Christian faith. I believe that our perceptions can really impact how we experience and feel about something. I remember someone saying to me at one time, it's all about the perception. So if we don't know what the perceptions are, how are we able to address them? I chose to use grounded theory for this project. What that means is that I did not start or enter into this research project with a presenting theory or even a presenting phenomenon, because I really didn't know if any of the non-monogamous individuals who would be willing to be research partners were even involved in Christian faith communities. And so any theory that is found or built during the course of this research project comes from the data alone. I am not working to prove or disprove a theory already developed, nor am I exploring what might be seen as one specific experience that all the participants shared in common. The other theoretical framework that I will be using is queer theory. Queer theory revolves around one's individual identity and how this identity is shaped in relationship to the larger society. Queer theory critiques the cultural understanding of identity as being static and normalized within society. The theory works to deconstruct societal understanding of identity, sexuality, power dynamics, and conformity. The construction of identity is a focus, while deconstructing dominant theories about identity itself as seen from the point of view of the larger society. So from this understanding, the identities of the research partners participating are constructed through their own contextual interactions with the world. This approach has allowed me to emphasize the diversity of the experience of those with whom I partnered in this research. So I had planned on interviewing 16 research partners for this project, but I ended up with 11 interviews in total. One of the challenges with grounded theory is that you hope, in the course of your study, to achieve what is called the saturation of data. With 11 interviews in total, and the themes that I identified being present in 80 to 100% of the individual interviews, and because those themes that came out were being repeated in different interviews, and no new major themes were coming forward, I consider this to be a saturation of data, enabling me to begin to formulate a theory from the data that I collected. In looking at the issue of non-monogamy, one might not think that one needs to be looking to the Bible. Yet, as we examine the Bible, in the biblical text, we see that there are many forms of relationship and marriage that are illustrated in the scriptures. Patrick Chang, in his book Radical Love, critiques monogamy from a deeper, more theological level, as he speaks to the erotic nature of the triune Godhead. Chang speaks of the concept of perichoresis, which he describes as the ecstatic dance or interpenetration of the three persons of the Trinity. And if we think about this, in some ways, this can speak to a polyamorous nature of the triune God. Because not only can God, by God's very nature, be polyamorous, but we see that by God's very nature, God is in deep relationship with each of the other members of the Trinity, and that they are in the same relationship with each other. And if we go one step further as Christians, we understand that God also desires and moves towards authentic, deep, loving relationship with humanity. So we can kind of understand that God's polyamorous nature is due to God's self itself and God's self's desire to be in relationship with God's creation. We can begin to see that non-monogamy might just be able to be seen as a natural, authentic form of sexual expression. And so I believe that it is prudent for us to look at this issue and maybe even go deeper and look into intimate erotic relationships between us and God and between us and each other. If we are to understand from the scriptures that God created everything, then we can understand that God created human. From the creation story in Genesis, we also find that the first thing that was not good in creation was the fact that human was alone. Genesis chapter 2, verse 18. As I examine this text, I find that I'm led in two directions. From a purely relational understanding of this text, we understand that according to God, it is not good for us to be alone. We were created to be in relationship with others. So God desires us to be in relationship with others. This leads to the question, how many others are we called to be in relationship with? Is there a specific number of others that we are to come into relationship with in our lives? So if we understand that we have been created to be in relationship and being created in God's image, we come into some form of relationship with God, we also need to understand that we are not God. We therefore might only be able to come into direct relationship with God in a very limited capacity. And so, if we go back to Chang and the idea of a deeply intermingled erotic nature of God, we might just come to see that although we might be limited in how intimately and erotically we can come into relationship with God directly, we might be able to come into deep, intimate, and erotic relationship with God to another human being who is also created in the image of God. So then, if we are in deep, intimate, erotic relationships with more than one, might that allow us to come into even deeper and even more intimate erotic relationship with God? And so from a theological standpoint, there is some basis to look at polyamory and non-monogamy as an authentic form of sexual expression. As I spoke of earlier, briefly, the themes that came out of the interviews were present in the majority of the interviews that were conducted, between 80 and 100%. And the following, therefore, are the four major themes that I found coming out of the data that was collected. Identity, Christian monogamy, worthiness, and spiritual fulfillment. The first theme that was identified was around the concept of what non-monogamy was to begin. The research question itself asked how a non-monogamous individual's sexual expression impacted their experiences and perceptions. What I found in interviewing my research partners was that non-monogamy goes far beyond the idea of sexual expression. Although each of the research partners identified a physical nature to their understanding of non-monogamy, and the physical part of non-monogamy was important to all of the research partners, their idea of non-monogamy actually went much deeper for each of them. As they spoke about what non-monogamy was to each of them, they themselves expanded the scope of the question far beyond the physical. They each began to use words that one would be more likely to hear when having someone speak of their identity rather than their sexual expression. Phrases such as being an authentic human being has meant exploring the limits of my sexuality. Others used language like authentic. This is who I am. It is not something that you decide. And finally, it just has always been in my nature. This idea that this was a natural part of who these individuals were was substantiated when they were asked how long they had understood themselves to be non-monogamous. The responses varied from a specific time period to responses such as, I can't identify a time frame. I would have to say my entire life, or from a very young age, to finally one of the research partners who said, I didn't even know that this was an option growing up. What emerged from this was that the research partners who I interviewed understood that non-monogamy was a part of their identity. The second strong theme that came out of the interviews was an understanding or perception of Christian faith communities, both historically and at the present time. This understanding has to do with what would constitute an authentic Christian relationship and sexual expression. In all 11 of the interviews, each of my research partners underscored the understanding that from their experiences, the only worthy relationship in the eyes of Christian faith communities historically were heterosexual, monogamous relationships. This was found across the entire range of Christian experiences, which included Roman Catholicism, United Church of Canada, Seventh-day Adventists, Latter-day Saints, Anglican Church of Canada, and an evangelical church. From this understanding, 9 of the 11 individuals interviewed believed that their non-monogamy would not be accepted in a Christian faith community. The other 2 research partners are currently deeply involved in a Christian faith community that knows in some limited way about their non-monogamy. Now, this is not to say that there has been an in-depth conversation. Rather, it has been expressed in passing. This hesitation to disclose has, as a result, impacted the relationships that these individuals have with Christian faith communities in a negative way, as they don't feel that they would be welcomed. As one research partner stated during the interview, "Here is another part of myself that might be an issue within the church." Another spoke of the disconnection in their life in the following way: "It pushed me away from my God." But not only was it articulated that there was a perception that the only authentic relationship was a monogamous relationship, when it came to any type of discussion around sexual expression, if it was discussed at all, it was discussed in a negative way. For the research partners who spoke of how this was expressed, it was always around what one should not do. If it was brought up at all, it was in the context of what was considered to be wrong or bad. It was expressed that any sexual behavior outside of monogamous relationships was sinful and to be avoided. The understanding that many churches historically and currently have understood the benchmark of authentic Christian relationship as monogamy has impacted each of the 11 research partners in very similar ways. And these impacts are overwhelmingly negative, as all 11 interviewees related negative thoughts and experiences around their understanding of self because of their history or understanding of the Christian faith. The most profound was verbalized by 2 of the interviewees as they spoke of being shunned by faith communities, and in some ways, by extension, society. Others who were interviewed spoke of a sense of disconnection, and with that, negative feelings around their perceived self-worth. One interview articulated that they felt devalued as an individual because of their experience of faith. Others spoke of feelings of pain. It hurts because we're still people with feelings. It was hurtful. I wasn't worthy. There were intense negative feelings and ideas around the concept of loss as the research partners articulated this in the following way: an inability to connect to a community of faith very much around that, non-monogamy, leaves a big deficit in my life. I was forced out of my previous congregation. They turned me away. What is interesting in the research is that 4 of my research partners are actively involved in Christian faith communities. As I said, 2 of them have had the conversation, albeit in passing, about the non-monogamy. The other 2, from the interviews presented, have not and are not willing to share that part of who they are with the community in which they're involved. In spite of these negative repercussions that were felt by the participants due to their history, their experience, or their perceptions of the Christian faith, there were strong feelings identified by all 11 of the participants when speaking of their understanding of the intersection of their non-monogamy and Christianity. These feelings were overwhelmingly positive, as each of the participants identified their understandings that Christianity is a faith that is based on a relationship with God, of their understanding, based in love. Being that this relationship is based in love, they identified that they themselves, all 11 of them, don't see that there is a contradiction between their understanding of themselves, their expression of themselves through non-monogamy, and the Christian faith. For those who are currently connected to a community of faith, as I said just a minute ago, 4 of the 11, faith and the relationship to God was central to their understanding of their world. Faith being so central to who I am, one respondent related. I still pray, another said. And finally, another involved in a Christian community understood their faith in the following way. A spiritual relationship with God that sort of fulfills the spiritual aspect of my life. An understanding that there was a connection to God was very important to all 11 of the respondents. And this helped each of them understand their relationships in a different way, as they spoke about the life-affirming nature of the relationships, or that they understood the relationships were something that sustained me, or that God was present within their understanding of their sexuality. I don't believe in anything good that my higher power doesn't exist. This then translated for 10 of the 11 interviewees understanding themselves to be spiritually fulfilled. The one interview where spiritual fulfillment was questioned ended up being because the individual had already recognized that there was an explicit lack of spiritual nurturing in their life currently. And this was articulated as not being from their understanding of themselves as being non-monogamous, but rather from their lack of tending to this part of their life. And so these 4 main themes were present in each of the 11 interviews that I conducted. And so what does this data tell me? And what theory might I see coming out of this project? I suppose that I will begin with the church. It appears from the interviews that each of my research partners understands that the church sees sexual expression as something that one does. And in understanding sexual expression as an action, the church then passes judgment on whether the action is good or bad, moral or immoral, right or wrong. Yet each of the research partners sees that their non-monogamy is actually something that goes far beyond something that they do. Each of them actually sees it as a part of their identity. And so what happens when identity gets judged, and judged in a negative way? It leads to disconnection from Christian communities, pain and hurt in the lives of those who are being judged. What is fascinating is that regardless of this disconnection, there is a deep connection to God or a higher power on the part of those who participated as research partners. And this has led to a deep sense of spiritual fulfillment for these individuals, which is not dependent on Christian faith communities. What this means is that the judgment of the church leads to a disconnection in the possibility of a pastoral relationship between those who understand themselves as non-monogamous and those same Christian faith communities, based solely on the Christian community's understanding and judgment of a perceived action. Meanwhile, those who understand themselves as non-monogamous hesitate to truly approach a Christian faith community with all that they are for fear of judgment. And because of this, we are both lessened. We, as Christians, struggle to fulfill our calling to enter into pastoral relationship with this community. And the non-monogamous community does not feel the love, care, compassion, and support of a Christian community. A number of research partners explain that although they would not put themselves online or on the line by approaching a Christian community, if Christian faith communities were willing to enter into conversations, they would be present and bring their authentic selves. This seems to be a place that the church has found itself to be in the past, as it has struggled through issues of gender, issues of sexual orientation, and issues of gender identity. So if we, as Christian faith communities, can move from a place of judgment to a place of authentic engagement, we might actually be able to move past that place of judgment and speak to all people about what it means for all of us to live into our full, authentic selves in a healthy way. I'd like to end with an updated, paraphrased version of the well-known scripture from Galatians. There is no longer Jew or Greek. There is no longer slave or free. There is no longer male or female. There is no longer straight or queer. There is no longer monogamous or polyamorous. For all of you are one in Christ Jesus. I don't see that this scripture talks about minimizing these identities, but rather affirming each identity as an authentic, supported identity within the body of Christ. And if we, as people in the church, can come to that understanding, then we might actually be able to address those perceptions of the non-monogamous community, of Christian faith communities, and allow all people to live into their true identity in a healthy way. Thank you. So, as I said, we have some people online, and my instructor, the Reverend Dr. Susan Wilhock, is online, and I would like to offer her the first question. We're just waiting. Typing a question or speaking? See a orange box on the screen. Yes. Oh. Yeah. And we have a microphone that will go around if people have questions.
All right, can you hear me? Can you hear me? I'm not. Can you hear me at all, Patrick? Or
Yeah, I can hear you.
please continue. Oh, great. All right. Oh, all right. Well, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation and your very important research. I'm just awed by what you have done, and I want to thank the audience that is there with you, because they're supporting you as well, and so and look forward to hearing their dialogue with you on this research. The question that I would, there's so much. This is rich research with so much thing, and I as a Christian practical theologian, I am committed to the church being radically hospitable to people of various sexual expressions, and so that has been sort of my life's work. But I'm gonna ask you, and I appreciate that you brought the concept of that it's not just sexuality is not just a bodily genital thing, and that into dialogue with Christian theology. But I'm looking at it from a practical theologian's point of view, and the way that it's perceived in our churches, and how can we be hospitable? I have to admit that I haven't seen that in my in my work without being judgmental, And so from a practical standpoint, in terms of a congregation or a denomination, is what do we need to do to welcome all persons to the table, regardless of their sexual expression? And I'd just like to hear you talk about that a little bit. What can we do? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. What's interesting is that one of my research partners made a comment through one of the interviews that they said that where they see the non-monogamous community right now is where the gay and lesbian community would have found itself in the 70s in the church. In that, as a church, seemed to be stuck on action as opposed to identity. And so when the gay and lesbian community was starting to come out in the 70s, and the churches were understanding that it seemed to be that being gay and lesbian was all about what you did in the bedroom. And so that became easy to judge as opposed to being an identity. Right. And so I question if the churches need to understand that identity is far more complex than what we think it is. And so as a church, where do we draw, like, do we have the authority, the moral authority to judge an identity? And how do we...
Exactly, yeah.
Pardon me? How do we open the...
No, I just was... Go ahead, continue.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much. And relationships are hard, and I wonder, you know, as if one were going to be like sort of an old school, you know, perception of this is how do we, like, relationships are difficult, and so non-monogamous relationships, are they less difficult, or is it relationship light, if you will?
So one of the challenges of doing a public presentation such as this is that you have a very limited scope of time to cover a whole lot of information. So in my research project, which is 35 pages long, just over 10,000 words, one of the issues that comes around with this issue of identity is the amount of communication, honest, authentic communication that is required within non-monogamous relationships, healthy non-monogamous relationships. And so a number of the research partners highlighted the amount of honest communication that they have to have on an ongoing basis with each and every one of their partners for non-monogamy to actually be healthy, and to be a healthy relationship. And so, as one of the research partners said, it is hard work to be in a non-monogamous relationship.
Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, Douglas, you said there was another question online?
Yes. Phil asks, did any of those who felt disconnected from a faith community have a desire to reconnect or harbor resentment?
None of them seem to harbor resentment. Thank you for that question. And all of them, which surprised me, all of them had a history within faith communities. Now, there was some pain, and I wouldn't necessarily say resentment, but there was pain. And so the one that I used, the quote I used, they pushed me away from my God. There's a sense of pain and loss as these individuals feel that they can no longer connect to a faith community. But I wouldn't say that there was a sense of resentment. And many of them said if Christian churches were willing and open to having the conversation, that they might be willing to enter into that as well. Do we have any questions here? Oh, question over here.
I'm curious, where did the idea of monogamy as the only way start out in our Christian faith? Since when you look at Jewish faith, you look at the Bible, there are many instances of polygamy there, but there aren't very many instances that I can think of, if any, of a woman having more than one partner.
Thank you for that question. And that was a challenge for me in my literature review part of this project, because everything that I was finding was critiquing non-monogamy in a really negative way, and whether that be from a religious perspective, sociological, like a socio-religious perspective, or even a psycho-religious perspective. The moment that the religion got in there, there was a sense that it was that non-monogamy was not desired. That the desired relationship was a monogamous relationship. Because if we look back to, I used in my paper the idea of Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar, and how there's a relationship there. Each of them have, Hagar and Ishmael, and God blesses Ishmael, Sarah and Isaac, and that they're all blessed. So the children of the relationship are blessed, so the relationship is blessed. But I don't know where Christianity came up with this idea that monogamy was the benchmark. But it has permeated Christianity, but also Western society. And that's why I chose to do it in a North American context, is because there are other contexts around the world in which non-monogamy is practiced. So, do we have any other questions?
Yes, Patrick.
Oh, I got Simba online. Simba, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for a rich presentation, and thank you for a rich and fulfilling research. Now, my question is, because we have been judgmental, and because we have been, I would say, more stereotypical than being authentic, like you have said, is a way forward. How do you think you can help us understand this information so that we change our attitude and our perceptions, like you said in the first place? Thank you.
I didn't quite catch your question. Let me move closer to the computer. Can you repeat the question, Simba?
Right. Thank you, Patrick. I am saying because we have been stereotypical in our approach. We have used the judgmental perspective, and now you are telling us this information that I think is very important and could be a turning point to us. As a way forward, what do you suggest that we do, and how do you think you can help us appreciate in terms of the identity that we used to have and now the real facts that you have? Thank you.
So how can I suggest that we can move forward from this, is what I'm getting from your question, Simba. Thank you. I think that the most important thing that I think we need to learn is that we need to allow people to self-identify who they are, not who we think they need to be. And that's in all aspects of their understanding of who they are. We have a tendency, I think, and the churches have a tendency to impose expected identities on people and impose expected understandings on people. And I think as a church, we need to move away from that place and come to a place of allowing people to self-identify who they are, and then instead of questioning that, figure out how can we support that in a healthy way. Does that answer your question, Simba?
Thank you. You did.
Okay. June.
I guess it's somewhat related, but I was curious about the people who no longer have a connection with the faith communities, but 7 people. Were they overtly pushed away, or did they feel, how open were they within their faith community? And the second part of that is for those who still have a connection, were they open to the community about their non-monogamy, and were any of their partners also part of that faith community?
Thank you. No, I'm just trying to figure out how to answer that in a way that's going to respect confidentiality of our research partners, because that needs to be paramount. Of the 7 that are currently not connected to a faith community, there have been some attempts by at least 2 of them to reconnect, but there were feelings of disconnection because they felt they couldn't be all that they were. They were hiding a part of who they were. One of them had a conversation with their parents, and their parents were the ones, or specifically one parent was the one that actually pushed them away from the faith community. And so there's a lot of distrust there. The four that are involved currently in faith communities, as I said, two of them have had that conversation in a very non-direct way, and two of them have not. Okay, and one of the one that has is in a triad, and there are children involved, and the family goes to church together. The family is involved in two different faith communities together. So that, although that conversation hasn't happened, the family does, they do appear together as a family quite often. And so it's quite the mix. Oh, we have one online? Okay, and then we'll do Laura.
Dave asks, you discussed how a theology of the Trinity can shape our views of polyamory. Has your research in turn shaped your view of the Trinity? Yes. I mean, it's. Dave would ask a theological question. He's one of the instructors at AST, so yes, I would say yes, it has. And specifically reading of Patrick Chang, with his understanding of the Trinity, and the idea of the erotic intermingling or the interpenetration of the triune God, I think is a really fascinating and actually in some ways a really beautiful way to look at the depth of connection within the Trinity. And so I would say yes, that this project and the research has helped me to understand in a much deeper way the Trinity, and in some ways in a new and different way. So, thank you. I hope that answers your question, Dave.
I was just wondering, we kind of looked at the separation from the church. Within the people that we were working with, was it an equal or greater separation from general society? Like how did living in a society, a monogamous society, sort of, I don't really want to say it, but was it the same as I can't be real at work, I can't be real in the store, I can't be real out of the church? Or did they find more of a separation in the church because it's more morality, value, content?
So in response to that, I think that for the most part, for most of the interview, the research partners had a sense of community within society. They had a group that they could be open with and that knew their understanding of themselves as being non-monogamous. And so that there are groups within that. And there was one research partner who spoke of a Christian swingers group in the States. And so that a lot of the research partners had support and had community in the wider society of people who understood themselves as well as non-monogamous. And that's why one of the things at the beginning of the presentation that got to me was when I went to this workshop in Halifax, the breadth of people who were there to learn about non-monogamy. In some ways, I was surprised. I didn't realize that. And so for most of them, they found that the church was an extremely judgmental place. Does that answer your question? So this is 7:30, and so I think this will be the last question, and then we can continue conversation. I mean, choir starts at 7:45, and I said it'd be done. Okay, so let's do Catherine's first, and then we'll do the online.
Okay, I think I remember what I was going to say. It seems to me that, I don't really know, but that there are some Christian communities that are sort of open and, like you said, how do we open the door, there are, I mean, it might be just in larger centers. Do you see that those places work for some folks? I had that question in my mind, but sort of, I don't know, just given what's happened this last week with the apology that happened, I was astounded by some of the things that people had gone through that I wasn't aware of. And I think that, like, part of the opening of the door is even just people knowing that these kinds of things, this is how people are feeling and about how they've been treated. It's not really a question, Patrick, but I just grabbed one.
No, but I appreciate that, because I think that actually goes to the crux of what this research was about. Is it's understanding the perceptions of those in the non-monogamous community, because those are the perceptions that need to be addressed. And that's why one of the things that, with the LGBTQ community is that there's been a lot of work in churches around that. But has that work addressed the perceptions of the community towards faith communities as being places of judgment and hypocrisy and pain? Because that's historically what the community has felt. And so if we don't understand what those perceptions are, as you said, you didn't understand what people had gone through. If we don't understand what those perceptions are, how can we ever address them and bring those people into or invite them in or support them if we don't understand what they're dealing with? So that's what I think why it was important for me to say, I think that this is something that needs to be looked at.
Okay, Amadeus asks, being authentic is certainly important, not only to oneself, but also as we express ourselves. You've brought that to light here. I am reminded of some time ago where the thinking was that the church and government should stay out of people's bedrooms. Do you think it is the church's job/work to bring out, validate, and help anyone, including non-monogamous, express that and live that, or should the church remain out of such issues and allow people to explore it themselves?
That's a really good question. Thank you, Amadeus. But I'm going to actually challenge you back a little bit. And I'm going to use a personal experience. It's that whole idea of it's okay to be gay as long as you don't act on it. And my response to that is everything that I do is gay because that's how I understand myself. It is a lens through which I view the world. It is an understanding of my identity. And so if we can understand non-monogamy, it's not about being in the bedrooms of the nation. It's about understanding that people who are non-monogamous view the world through that lens. That is who they are. And so as a church, it's a question of when do we start to recognize different identities and start to support and validate and lift up all of those different identities, and then work at people living in healthy identity in whatever that is. So that's how I would answer that question. And I think we have come to the time of the day. Thank you everyone online for showing up, and thank you for all of you for being here. Really appreciate it.